Okay, welcome to our fourth and final webinar with our Starting a Specialty Food Business in Idaho series. We are so excited that you've been able to join us for today's class and for the previous weeks that we've been doing. We've had really good feedback and quite a bit of attendance, and people really enjoying joining us live and watching the recording. So my name is Jennifer Werlin. I'm a University of Idaho Extension educator in Teton County. And I started doing these specialty food business classes back in 2017 and 18, and I did them locally in my community in partnership with the Teton Valley Kitchen. And this year we decided to bring this to a statewide format. And our presenters today for our fourth webinar are Ariel Eigenbrod and Josh Bevan. And I'll let Ariel take over and introduce herself a little bit more. But thank you so much. Feel free, if you have any issues, feel free to use the chat feature. And then also you can email me at any time, jwerlin@uidaho.edu. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jen, so much, and welcome everyone. My name is Ariel Eigenbrod. I'm an area extension educator serving the Southern District, but I do have some statewide responsibilities in farmers markets, farm to school, on-farm food safety, and I work a lot with my fellow educators like Jen so that we can cover as many bases as possible in our geographically very diverse and large state. So I'm going to be talking to you today about a little bit about marketing and your role as both a consumer and as your future as a food producer and marketer. And then I'll be joined in about an hour from Josh Bevan, who's the director of our Food Technology Center here in Caldwell. And he'll do a little bit more introducing about himself and what he does with that center. And some of you may or may not be familiar with it. And depending on where you live in the state, you may be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities afforded by this facility. So just if you've attended previously, then you've probably seen these webinar tips. You will have the best luck if you don't have other programs running concurrently on your computer. If you are having problems with your sound, you can always switch speakers, log out, log back in, or you can actually call in on your phone and get the audio that way. And the call-in phone number is also going to be in that welcome email. So go back to that email if you're having troubles. If you are having questions or comments or concerns, go ahead and put those into the chat. We're happy to try to address those either afterwards or during the talk if you need immediate clarification. And then now and possibly even later, you will be getting some handouts available to download. So if during the conversation we realize, I've got a handout that would really help to answer that question. Jen, can we send that out after the webinar? I think that's definitely something that we can do. And then once this is finished up for today, the recording will get processed and then that will be made available to you as well. And it can take a few hours, sometimes even up to 24 hours to be ready. So just wait on that if you can't wait to watch it again, which you may or may not. So some of the things that we wanted to tackle today in the webinar were some food trends, right? How Americans are eating, how marketing works for and against you, just a really deep dive into how are people eating and how does this impact your plans for your specialty food business. Josh is going to join us, like I said, and talk about some lessons learned from an Idaho Specialty Food Incubator program. He's also going to talk about how the incubator works and what services it offers. And then he's going to share some really important best practices for packaging, marketing, and distribution. And I saw his slides this morning, and I'm really excited about him. He talks about labeling. He talks about certifications and some other things that I feel are really important to know about upfront before you get started. All right, so I am going to jump right in. I do want to let you know that I'm going to offer you the opportunity to participate a little bit in this presentation by using the Annotate feature in Zoom. So if you haven't used this, at the top, I've got a black bar where I've got my mute button and I've got the capacity to turn my, my video on and off, right? So if you go along that line of features, there's a button called Annotate, and it's like a pen or a pencil there. If you click that, you get this whole range of ways to participate on the screen. So for instance, you can choose a drawing feature and you can draw all over my screen. I'm going to ask you not to do that quite yet, but there's going to be some opportunities for us to do that and to participate and kind of give your vote using the Annotate feature, right? If that is too complicated for you, maybe you're watching on a phone, you're like, that's just too small, you can always type your answer into the chat. It's just a way for us to gauge some of these questions that I'm going to be asking, all right? So I just wanted to let you know that that's there and you're welcome to use it. All right, so I'm going to jump into my talk. So I call this the new food reality, understanding the way that we and how we influence and are influenced by the market. So this is an exercise in you thinking about your own habits and behaviors as a consumer of food, comparing that to some national trends and national averages, and then also coming back to thinking about this in terms of you as a food producer wanting to market a food product or a food concept, and maybe some things that might help you to clarify how it is that you are going to sell that product or how to tap into some of the current trends. Now, I will preface this by saying that a portion of this presentation was developed pre-COVID, so pre-pandemic. And I'm really interested to see how some of these trends have been affected, maybe magnified or amplified by pandemic. Certainly, when we talk about, eating food at home and not going out to restaurants, that certainly had a major impact over the last year. But as we see some things return to a new version of normal, I'll be really interested to watch the data and what's collected about food trends as our country. But so just giving you that some of these may have changed and may not be as accurate as they were at first. So these are things I'd love feedback on too. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a quote from Cornell University. Most people do not really know why they buy what they buy, eat what they eat, or do what they do. So do you agree with that? What do you think? Certainly, I think most of you probably are a little bit more tuned in with food. You're maybe a foodie. You really are thinking about food 24/7. You may have a much different perception of that. But this is in general, consumers are often behaving and they don't know why. They don't know what's really driving that. So let's start with my first question. Again, you can use the Annotate feature. You can draw, stamp, circle, whatever you want to do on your answer. You can also type your answer into the chat and I'll try to go back and forth and catch that. So my first question, are you eating at home more often or less often than you did before? And I think in terms of before, how about we go back to like say 2019, right? Or it could be right now. Like, are you eating at home more often than you did during the pandemic? Maybe you didn't have restaurants close in your community. So we can discuss this, but just let's see what you think of this right now. So give it your best shot. I am seeing some answers in the chat. That is probably easier for some of you, but don't be shy about drawing all over my screen. I'm happy to engage that too. All right, so according to the chats, yeah, a lot of you are eating at home more often than you did before, and possibly before being pre-pandemic, right? All right, so the way that this is going to work, I'm asking you as a consumer, and then we're going to look at some fairly recent data or data that I can access free of charge, because a lot of food and consumer data is very, very expensive if you want to get the most up-to-the-minute research. So some of these numbers are coming from a couple years ago, but a lot of these are long-term trends. So in 2018, there was a research group that really was stating that regardless of where we are sourcing our meals, we are increasingly consuming them at home. So this does not necessarily mean that you're making all of your meals at home, but you are consuming your meals at home. And so those of you that said yes, you are in alignment with that national trend of eating your food at home, even if it's made somewhere else. All right. So this one, it's really hard for people to be honest about, but let's give it a shot, right? How many snacks on average are you consuming every day? And I had my husband in one of these classes once, and people had to put their head down and just raise their hand. And I knew that he was lying because I watch him consume like 5 to 6 snacks a day. So let's see what you guys are thinking. How many snacks on average are you consuming daily? Yeah, we've got lots. Yeah, we don't always keep track, right? It's just I'm constantly grazing. Some of you are very conscious and plan your snacks out. Great. I'm seeing everywhere from two lots. Yeah. Yeah. Looks like the average is 2 to 3, at least in the group that we have on right now. Excellent. Okay. So what do we want to see? What's the national trend? Half of adults in the United States are eating 3 or more snacks per day. So you guys are actually on the lower end of the average, right? You're not crazy snackers, right? You're maybe more sensible snackers. Excellent. I like this. Okay. So just got to get rid of a window here. Okay, so next question. And this is a loaded question, and some of you are going to already be thinking a few steps ahead and asking me to define this, but this is just from your initial gut feeling, right? When you see these words, when you see the word fresh foods, do you feel that fresh foods are healthier? Yes or no? And this is where it can sometimes be hard to do this with a really sophisticated audience because, you know, they're saying, well, what do you mean by fresh? And what counts as fresh? And is frozen fresh? And what do you, yeah. But I just want you to just go with your gut. Fresh foods, however you define them, you feel that they are healthier. Great. I'm seeing a lot of you saying yes, right? Okay, well, what are the national trends? Nearly 9 out of 10 adults, so 87%, feel that fresh foods are healthier. And again, this is undefined as to what is a fresh food. It's just the concept of if a food is fresh, it is healthier. And this is just an impression that consumers are having. And obviously we're having it too, right? Excellent. Okay, so this goes along with that. And again, this is however you define fresh foods. Are you making an effort to choose more fresh foods when you are shopping, dining out, you know, in whatever ways that you are consuming? What do we think about this? Remember, you can annotate and mark up my screen, or you can just type a response in the chat and I'll be kind of watching it. Great. Okay, we're having, oops, sorry, my mouse is really touchy. Our question was, are you making an effort to choose more fresh foods? Several of you said yes. All right, and you would not be alone. 78% of consumers are making a strong effort to eat more fresh versus processed foods. And again, you know, the definition of fresh is not put out there. So it's just your interpretation of what fresh is. Yes, you're choosing more of them. Okay. So this is one, you know, again, this might be a lot to type in the chat. So if you want to annotate or if you just want to think about this is a value question, right? And this goes back to, do people know what they're eating, why they're eating what they eat? What is important to you? And so some of these things, if you're really savvy, you will know that they don't have a set definition. Some of them do have an actual set definition or certification. But what values related to your food are important to you? Is it the way that they're produced? So maybe being humanely raised or organic or sustainable. You know, buzzwords like natural or fresh or clean, you know, do those things resonate with you? Are you choosing based on your convenience? You know, you've got a really busy life and you've got kids to feed and you're just trying to get food on the table. Maybe the affordability comes into that, but then maybe you're really trying to make conscious efforts about the foods that you eat being culturally and authentic to your history, your family culture. Yeah. So some of these words do resonate with you. And like some of you are saying too, often it's not just one, it's a combination, right? We've got to have affordability, but we're also looking as much as we can to say maybe getting pasture raised meat or eggs. And depending on the community that you live in, sometimes that actually is an affordable choice if you have relationships with local farmers, or maybe you're even producing it yourself. That's something I don't know is what all of you are planning to do in your future in food products. Yeah, so nationally, these things are becoming very important to consumers. And if you look at this, over half of consumers say that it is important that the foods that they purchase and consume be produced in some kind of sustainable way. And sustainable can have a lot of different meanings and definitions, right? And it's not something you can really always measure, but you look for indicators of that. So maybe organic, maybe natural, so preservative free or free from artificial preservatives, colors, flavors, that kind of thing. Maybe there are some ways that you determine that that food is sustainably produced or produced with less pesticide, or, in some way, maybe you're just really looking at more affordable food. So all of these things have seen an increase in consumers prioritizing these things in their purchasing, right? So these are definitely increasing in importance. And so what does this all mean, right? And what are some of these things? Are they valid? Are they certifiable when people are looking for this? So we look at some examples, right? Fresh, right? Fresh is not something that is defined by the industry, by any kind of regulating body or authority. Fresh is something that you can claim, no matter what kind of product that you're using. Pure, premium, like there's a lot of words on this orange juice that are really meaningless technically, but they are attractive and appealing to the consumer. So I would say on this, we've got original, right? So that's like, I'm a classic orange juice drinker. I like original juice. No pulp, that does have a meaning, right? To most of us who drink orange juice, we either like pulp or we hate pulp. The fresh, yes, we're guessing that means that the oranges were not frozen, but fresh, how long can they be in storage and still be fresh? I don't know these things. I'm not in the orange juice, manufacturing world. This does say never from concentrate. So we do know that it was, made from oranges at some point. So the only thing, the weight and measure and the calories and things like that can be validated, but really on this label, the one thing that is probably something that is a third-party certification is this non-GMO verified. However, as a horticulturist, I do know that we don't have any GMO oranges currently in production. And so, that can be more or less meaningless when you're looking at comparing orange juice brands, right? None of the orange juices are likely to have genetically modified organisms unless, there's some other kind of juice or something else in there. So just kind of some things to think about. Another one that I always laugh at sometimes are, here's some gluten-free vegetables, right? Well, gluten is found in, grains and wheat proteins. It's not found in most vegetables. So beware of claims, right? And beware of making claims that really are kind of pointless and just getting on to the trends. So here's another label for chicken. Right. And I like this one too. Again, there are some things that are rather meaningless and some things that are really important here. So all natural, right? The only thing that really is qualifying this chicken to be all natural is that it is minimally processed, right? It hasn't been fried or breaded or pounded or changed into a hot dog or something. And it has no artificial ingredients. If the ingredients is 100% chicken, there really isn't an option for artificial ingredients, right? Unless it was like purple chicken or something like that. No added hormones. Oh, that sounds great, right? Well, federal regulation prohibits the use of hormones in poultry. So they would never have had any hormones either. That's not really a value add. It's just something that they can put on here. The no antibiotics ever, the vegetable and grain fed, those might be important to you. And that might, have an impact on how you feel about the health or goodness of this chicken. Young, I'm not sure really what the parameters are for that chicken to be young, though we tend to think that a younger chicken is going to be more tender. I think the only thing that you can guarantee on this chicken is that there are no giblets or neck in this package, right? That's the only thing that really has a lot of, when it's gluten-free chicken, right? There's been no wheat added to the chicken. So, I tend to kind of get a little bit silly with this, but it's just to show that there are so many things that marketers are capitalizing on or trying to attract their consumers with that more or less don't really have a lot of meaning. But yet we still might be drawn to them. I mean, I am always drawn to the all natural, or, those words appeal to me, even though I know that they are really not a verifiable claim. All right, so let's keep going on this. I could talk about this for a long time, and I don't have a whole lot of time. So let's talk about this. Do you consciously, so we talked about the things that you might go seek out. Are you consciously avoiding any specific food items in your diet? For example, are you avoiding carbs, meat, dairy, eggs, gluten, artificial colors, flavors, or sweeteners? Are you looking for any of those not included types of things in your foods? And again, these might be personal things that you don't want to share, but I would love to know if you are. You could just circle this with the Annotate. That is anonymous, by the way, or you could type something into the chat. Give you one more second. All right, somebody's brave. Yes, great. Oh yeah, or because maybe somebody in the family. Yeah, absolutely. So you could have many motivations for doing this. Yeah. All right. So it is becoming increasingly popular and increasingly of concern for consumers to avoid something in their food. And it could be that they have personal restrictions, they have intolerances, they have allergies. Maybe they're trying to figure out what it is that is making them ill. And so they're trying elimination diets. Maybe they're just really making a conscious effort for a number of reasons to avoid certain things like sugar. And then maybe too, it's a life or death thing. If they consume this food, they're going to be very, very sick. So this is becoming more important, and it is certainly becoming more of a marketing. So this is back in 2014. So this is some time ago, right? And I think I have a slide on how this is increasing over time. In 2014, 1/3 of adults had tried a specialty regimen, at least for a period of time, whether it was gluten-free, lactose-free, raw food, or dairy-free. We look at more recently, so 4 years later, 36% are now reporting to follow a specific eating pattern or diet, including some of these other things like keto, low carb, paleo, high protein, intermittent fasting. And I think this is where I've seen an absolute explosion in new food products that are addressing some of these diet plans or patterns and providing options for these folks to be able to follow those diets and have commercially available foods ready to them. All right, I'm just going to check this chat real quick. Yes, okay, great. So we'll keep going with this. So I think that leads us back to thinking about this. So if you look at this just from your own personal standpoint, are you at all confused by some of the information that's out there that's related to your dietary choices and your health? And I would say I am. Sometimes I see a new food product or some kind of claim and I think, should I be concerned about that? Have I been eating, poisonous food all along because it's not meeting this need? So, I think all of us, even if we are in the food industry or the food education industry, are still influenced by market trends, by the fads. Things get confusing. Like, what are the long-term, effects of this? So, I think it's very understandable to be somewhat confused and just to have questions, and you don't always have really quick answers to these things. All right, thank you. So, and you would not be alone. So, right, 8 in 10 consumers say that there is a lot of conflicting information. I think that's what one of you just said in the chat about what foods to eat or avoid. And I think some of us might take more of just a common sense approach, but some of us are, really trying to work through issues or health issues. And, food can be a very important part of finding solutions to things that ail us. So I think there's a lot of information out there. Some of it's good, some of it extraneous. This was just something funny. I just did a Google search on the best, healthiest foods to eat, right? And then I just let everything come. It is no doubt that we are confused, that we are overwhelmed. And for any life stage, health issue, whatever, there are going to be a million different suggestions for us as to what to eat and how to stay healthy. So from a consumer side, you might say, well, that's really overwhelming and a little bit confusing. But on the food entrepreneur side, you might say, that's a whole world for us to go in and start to move around in and maybe find our niche. So that's kind of my two sides to this presentation today is, what resonates with you as a consumer, but what are other consumers out there looking for and not finding? So this was really interesting, what's coming next and what is kind of new for Americans' eating habits. So a new mega trend, and I will say that I haven't seen this change at all during COVID. In fact, I probably saw it become even more enhanced because some of us had the luxury of eating at home or, not being able to go and eat at restaurants the way we like to. So a new mega trend focused on gourmet convenience, interested in more plant-based fare, and a need for more complete grab-and-go meal solutions that really meet some of those values are among the factors creating fundamental shifts in Americans' eating habits. And I would venture to say that some of these have only gotten stronger over the past year and a half. So let's look at these trends really quick. So major trend is that fresh eating equals healthy eating equals money for purveyors of fresh foods. We'll keep working on what fresh means. Snacks and ready-to-eat foods are really redefining mealtime. The convenience revolution and reinvention, we are going through an astounding shift in what convenience foods look like, right? We're not just talking about freezer, TV dinners anymore when we're talking about convenience. And then food going digital and delivery getting creative, I would say that we probably advanced 5 years in the last year and a half in terms of what this looks like and what opportunities there are for food to get to us as a consumer very, very quickly, right? However you might feel about that. So fresh is big business, right? So in 2014, fresh foods accounted for 29% of all US grocery sales. And then, so that would probably be in 2019. Like I said, I don't have the most recent access, but I really like to know this number. But now fresh foods are driving almost 50% of dollar growth across all the consumer goods categories. And I would say that this is probably even more so because our groceries, and especially their delis, their fresh prep, all of that, were probably saw huge leaps and bounds last year as people were able to shop at grocery stores. They weren't able to go out to restaurants, okay? So fresh is the most disruptive trend in grocery today, right? I would look at that more as an opportunity and maybe something that is of benefit to human health, but it is certainly upending how probably traditional grocery worked in the past, right? So disruptive trend. So, but fresh is big business. There is no doubt about that. And back in 2014, it was predicted that the premium fresh format grocery store, focusing really heavily on the fresh and ready to eat foods, they were expected to have the highest growth rate through 2008. And I would say that that is over the top and through the roof. And if you live in any of the larger communities in Idaho, I'm in Boise, that's where I live. We've certainly seen this. And I live just walking distance from one of these new Albertson stores. And when it opened, it was just, it was shocking. There was like demonstrations and there's big screen TVs and there's, like this unending deli. And it was basically like a Whole Foods. Pretty crazy. We also have, like in Boise, we have the Boise Co-op. Now looking at ways to deliver groceries. So that would not have been the case before. You had to go to the co-op and do your shopping. So we're seeing lots of groceries doing this, everywhere from Walmart to Whole Foods to our Boise Co-op doing fresh deliveries. And then we're also seeing, right, bypassing the grocery altogether and these, this really resurgence or surgence in things like meal kits and fresh prep. Here's the ingredients, make dinner yourself. So these have grown by leaps and bounds, and there's a lot of different ways that these are being distributed and marketed as well. So there are some things that we've used to call trends that that food forecasters are now really believing are not a trend anymore, but they are going to be here. And so this is something interesting to think about. And I think especially if you're starting to think of yourself as a smaller scale food entrepreneur, these are some things that I think you have a really unique position in, because sometimes these are easier to do on a very small scale. So here's some things to think about. I think the focus on animal and human welfare in the production of food. We're looking at the animal safety, the animal quality of life, the human safety and quality of life in producing foods. I think this is becoming more important. Also, organic, local, and really real food. I think you see this co-opted by a lot of large-scale food companies, but for those consumers that are looking for the authentic thing, they're never going to be able to provide that, right? They want to know that face to their food, and that is really the purvey of a small food producer. Functional food, so food that is not only good, but it's good for you, I think is just going to continue to be important as we really continue to obsess about our health. And then anything chocolate, that just seems to always top the list of food trends. New ways with chocolate, chocolate as a functional food, right? Organic, local chocolate, chocolate that is free trade. You can see it covers all of those categories. All right, I'm just going to check the chat really quick. But yeah, so lots of different options for those sorts of delivery and meal plates. And maybe that is something that you're looking into developing or delivering. I'm really excited to hear what you might be doing. So this is really interesting. This was a news article from Cargill. Cargill is one of the largest livestock companies in the United States, probably the world. And they themselves are acknowledging that generational shifts are redefining the future of protein, and that sustainability and technology are key ingredients in meeting the global demand. So it's not just about how much can we produce for how cheap, even though that is still a real driver. These companies even are realizing that consumers, they want to feel better about it. Now, whether or not that means that the shift is really going to be, down to the level where it really matters, or if it's going to be just painting a new face on this, that remains to be seen. But I do think it's important to note that companies are seeing this, they're recognizing this, and hopefully making some shifts in how they do business. But this was interesting. So these were some of the actual changes that they were making, right? So looking at ways to reduce their water use in United States production, limiting the antibiotics, removing all growth promoting hormones, and really just looking at how their health care for their animals needs to change in order to reduce the amount of antibiotics that are in the food system. So again, you can take some of these with a grain of salt, depending on your level of knowledge of some of these companies and their practices. But I just use it as an example that the big guys are thinking about this too, and the small guys are also thinking about it. All right. I don't know if some of you ever watched the television show Portlandia. It's one of my favorite programs. And there was this wonderful episode where the couple goes into the restaurant and they want to know, is the chicken local? And then they start asking more and more questions. And eventually the waitress brings out basically a biography of the chicken with its photograph and where it lived and what it did with its life before it came to the restaurant. And then the couple ends up getting up from the table and going out to the farm so that they can really see where that chicken lived and what it did. And then they end up spending like 5 years on the farm. But it was very funny because, this is kind of making fun of the modern consumer, but it also resonated with me because we do want to know this. And as potentially someone who might be engaged in producing livestock, this is going to be important to you too, to tell that story of your chicken. And I will just back this up a little bit with some data from 2016 versus 2015. And again, these are probably just going up, looking at millennials and boomers and their reasons for purchasing locally sourced produce. So this is just produce, but you could think about it in terms of other locally produced foods, right? What are the values that are driving those choices? So number one really is the support of local farmers and the local economy and keeping those producers viable food is fresher, it's traveled fewer distances. And so that is, and again, that fresh, not necessarily defined, but however they define it, they believe it's important. Knowing where that produce is grown, potentially having less environmental impact, it being unique, knowing the farm story, better prices down there, because some people don't always understand the more realistic pricing that comes along with local food. But certainly considering that maybe it has better nutritional value. And again, that might be tied in with that freshness or the lack of time it's been on the store shelf. But I really find this to be really interesting, is that supporting your local farmers and supporting a local economy is very, very high among both millennials and boomers. And so, you know, being able to tell your story, that your product is local and that your family lives here and is growing and producing and making this food, I really think this is where you have the strongest voice in promoting your product. And some of you may have goals to be a global product. That's absolutely great. You know, the sky is the limit. But no one else can claim this the way that you can, right? The markets may, you know, the grocery stores might be set up to look like a farmer's market, and they might use the same imagery and some of the same words, but they can't claim, you know, that these flowers were grown here in your community and brought to the table, or this honey, you know, was created by bees that fed on local pastures and local orchards. So you've got that story to tell. Make sure that that's being told in whatever it is that you're growing and producing. Okay. And some, you know, and like I said, some companies are capitalizing on this. You know, the Boise Co-op is really promoting that they are serving, you know, over 220 local vendors for their food products. Now, again, you might say, well, what are they considering local? And that's something to really discuss with your vendor or the market that you sell into, because sometimes they define that a little bit differently, and they may not define it the way that you define it or the way that some of your customers might define it. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit from the food trends and you know, and some of those things and how they might impact you. So we could take a couple of seconds here if you would like to ask any questions on what we just talked about before we start looking at some of the market influences that are out there. Anybody have anything that they just have a burning desire to share or ask right now? And it's totally okay if you don't. I think a lot of us like to watch Zoom from a little bit of a distance and not necessarily have to talk or turn our camera on. But just know that that's there. You can ask a chat, you can email us, you know, anything you want to talk about or know. And yeah, I would be really interested to know what some of you are thinking, but maybe we can do that at the end after Josh's talk, because he's going to be sharing a lot of great info too. All right, so for a while, for many years, there was a food lab in Cornell that did a lot of research into consumer trends, and it was very like kind of pop culture friendly. Lots of really interesting articles came out of that department in terms of marketing and customer susceptibility and our behaviors and habits and how influenceable we were. Everything from, you know, that like cereal boxes have characters on them and they're placed at children's eye level. So your kids are locking eyes with, you know, the tigers and the elves and everything like that. And actually, you know, causing them to want to buy that food because they're making eye contact with them, like crazy stuff like that. Also how, you know, these are just some of the different examples, right? So what's really interesting, and I think really telling about this, is that this department was coming up with some really, really fun stuff. Turns out, though, a couple of years later, that the leading researcher in this department was actually, the science wasn't always sound. They were doing a lot of, you know, feel good, fun, experimental things, but their actual scientific practices in collecting and evaluating the data was really not in line with recognized scientific best practices. So while there was a lot of great stuff coming out of that, and probably a lot of it that still was based on sound science, the leading nutrition scientist was actually found to be in misconduct and resigned. So what this tells to me, though, is that you can't believe everything that you see or hear, right? And especially when it's related to marketing. So there's a lot of information out there, and some of it may or may not be true. But some of the things that really were kind of fun that came out of that, I thought this one was especially good, right? So this was the fact that if you are looking at something like an advertisement and you see graphs and formulas, right, and it looks like it's scientific, you may be more persuaded to believe that that product is effective or meeting that goal, right? May not be true at all, but if you see a graph, you're more likely to think that there is something behind it. So not sure if that is really accurate or not, but I did bring up some graphs to share with you as we're closing out my section here. So what you say versus what you mean, right? When you say one chip, you actually might mean 2 bags of chips. And since this is a graph, it has to be scientifically accurate, right? I know that this is sometimes true for me, but if it's beet chips, is that okay? I don't know. So I actually am done a little bit early because I'd love to hear a little bit more about maybe what you're planning to produce or some of the thought processes and how you may want to incorporate some of these trends, or maybe you're already thinking about these trends in terms of what it is that you want to do. So I'd like to open that up for any possible discussion or thought. You're welcome to do it or not, but we'll give you that space. And if you do want to comment, you just unmute and just begin talking and we will listen.
You mentioned something about how a lot of the data was from pre-COVID times. Have you seen anything like if it seems like we have changed our habits a little bit. And
So,
yeah, I'll let you chat.
So I have seen a few articles recently that say we are moving back away from, like everybody making sourdough in their kitchens, and we are moving away from cooking, and maybe we got burned out on that a little bit. So what I would think is that we were following these trends, and I say we, this is again, not every American, I'm just looking at overall. There was a shift toward more cooking at home prepared foods. I don't know that that is sticking as much. I think as people are having the opportunity again to not make their own food and to buy food and to have food prepared for them, I think that is on the upswing again. And I think a lot of people probably weren't making food at home. I think they were just getting food more in takeout, or maybe they were looking at some of those meal kits and things like that to still make it easy on them, because I don't think the pressures that were driving us towards convenience and and having those things readily be available, I don't think those things have changed. And I think especially professional folks are going back to work, and juggling all these things with school and childcare, et cetera. I think that those are probably going to remain, but I'd be very interested to see what the most recent data is going to show, and start accessing that and looking into it. Good question.
So you were mentioning the Cornell researcher and the outfall of all of that research. So are they doing the research still with a different lead scientist?
Yeah, as far as I know, the Cornell Food Lab is still there, and probably under more rigorous leadership. So we could send out that link in the afternotes. I will go and pull that for you. There are also a lot of, like private research companies and, industry driven sources for this kind of information. But like I said, a lot of times you have to pay for it. And it's very, very expensive because, the top food companies in the world are buying that data and, using it to make decisions years before the general public kind of gets the memo. So it makes it hard, even from a university standpoint. I can't always, access it. They want like, $2,000 to access 2020, studies or data. So, that's why I would rely on things like the Cornell Food Lab, because they were, open access, free research, to see. But a lot of the trade journals and things like that will highlight the findings from major research. And so I'll look to that also as a source of information, and then try to track back down that original study and see if I can validate it at all. So I would encourage, if you're thinking of a specific type of food, to see what kind of industry research and data is out there related to those foods. You may not always want to know the answer. It might be kind of scary, but I think it's worth protecting yourself by finding out what's out there and if it could benefit you in some way.
Well, I found it interesting. I've been collecting data for our local farmers market since 2017. And during the pandemic, the sales have increased exponentially. So this is the last 2 summers that we've been collecting data. In 2020, we had less vendors because we were trying to increase distance between the vendors. And so we just didn't have as much space, and we had actually less, we didn't have the crafts. Most of the crafts were in a different location. And despite having less vendors, they still increased their sales over the summer. And then this last year, we surpassed sales like halfway, even like maybe not even halfway through the summer. So the trends in terms of like looking here locally have been that there's so much more tourism, and I don't know how that's factoring into the products that are being sold, but for our value added producers and those working on specialty food products that are selling at the farmers market, they found increased sales, and that a lot of the people visiting the farmers market are tourists. They're here. So I'm located in the Tetons, and people are here on vacation. They see the farmers market, they go in, they want to grab a bite to eat. So they want something that's really convenient. So I found that maybe perhaps people looking at their local region and where they're going to be selling their products and seeing if there's data out there that's available to them.
That's a really great point. And I think most of us in Extension have at least some data about our local farmers markets. And, just anecdotally, I volunteer with the Boise Farmers Market pretty regularly, and they've continued their drive-through market this year. So that's people order ahead online, and then we pack up their bags and they come drive through and pick it up. And so I work on the bag line because I've always had a secret love of bagging up groceries, and probably someday, maybe when I'm retired, I'll work in bagging groceries because I love it. But it's been really interesting to see what goes into their bags, right? You have the people that are cooking because they're getting shallots and they're getting whole beets and they're getting kale, by the bunch, and that they're going to be making something. But the overwhelming number of bags that I pack all have the local bread, the local pastries, the local cookies, the wine, the kombucha, not even just the cuts of meat, but the sausages and, the things like that. We have a fresh ravioli pasta company. Many bags get the pastas in there. They've started packaging up, fresh made soup. So I'm seeing a lot of those like convenience foods, but convenience foods that are meeting people's value for shopping local, buying organic, supporting their local grower, humanely raised meat products. So just based on the eating habits of the hundreds of bags that I packed for Boise Farmers Market customers, I would say that I am definitely seeing the validation of some of these trends, and a lot of chocolate croissants going into bags. So yeah. All right. So great. I think we might as well go ahead and let Josh get started early because he is here. And I have a feeling that since he is one of the nuts and bolts guys, there's going to be questions for him. So Josh is the director of our University of Idaho Food Technology Center. It is here in Caldwell, but his work has both local and global ramifications. And I don't think we have time for him to tell you everything that he does. He's really going to focus on the incubator and small business development side of what he does, but we'll probably talk a little bit about what the center does in addition to that, which allows it to fund the side that is the incubator and small business development. So I'm going to stop my sharing of this screen, Josh, and we're going to give you a try to be the sharer. Okay.
Host is
And I can-
disabled participant
Okay,
sharing.
hold on. Hold on. We can change this, I think.
Should be good now.
Is it good now? Okay. And we can see and hear you well, so that's good. All right, it looks like
That's a
it's
good
going to
start.
work.
Yay, can you see it?
Yes, looks great.
Excellent. So thank you for that introduction, Ariel. As she stated, my name is Josh Bevan. I'm the director of the University of Idaho's Food Technology Center housed in Caldwell, Idaho, approximately 5 to 5.5 hours from the mothership. I'm going to take this opportunity to give you a little bit of a background about this center. We're going to cover some packaging and labeling, marketing and distribution to the best of my ability. So the main mission of this facility is actually to provide a commercial space for people to produce product. Ideally, they leave this space eventually. We do have some long-term anchor clients that have been here longer than me. Actually, just yesterday, we had Backcountry Bar in, and they've been here for about 14 years. They can produce quite a few bars at this facility, and I think they're happy to continue to do so, but they are looking at a co-packing option at this point. But that is the main mission of our facility. So entrepreneurial development, we focus primarily in Idaho, but we have had people throughout the Northwest use this facility. Pre-pandemic, we would teach a class roughly quarterly that is not unlike this one, similar broad brushstrokes covering how to produce a food product. We also have a pilot plant, and the pilot plant is used mainly by large business, let's say Simplots of the world and the agricultural chemical industry. We do run a little lean. We're a self-funded facility. Right now, you've got me, of course, and Sini as the kitchen supervisor. She's the go-to for anything kitchen related for the most part. And we do have some part-time people. And as you can see, services of the kitchen, I don't really like to call it a kitchen. It's really a small commercial space. We don't really have knives. We're not set up to be a commissary kitchen. It's a small production facility that's really well suited to hot processed or cold processed products. We have a walk-in freezer, walk-in cooler storage. We, of course, assist people with various different requirements, whether they're receiving licensing from the local health district to sourcing packaging, labeling, and that kind of thing. Now, people to use our kitchen, they typically make an application or, just call. We're usually happy to entertain a quick tour to see if this is a good fit for your product. And then you need to take a class from us that is now, it's been converted online in cooperation with Tech Help. You do have to have insurance. We prefer you not get sued, but we definitely don't want the university to get sued. So that is an important aspect of running a business. And we will make sure that you fulfill your licensing requirements. It's really not that big of a deal. We've got an excellent relationship with the health district in which we're housed. And of course, scheduling, which we can usually figure out. These are just some of the things that we can do. It's a fairly diverse space. In these photos, some of them are actually old, but Treasure Valley Salsa is hot filling in the bottom right. That is Dilly's. Dilly's now has a manufacturing facility in Kuna, Idaho. Yes, they packed all that freaking asparagus by hand. It was quite laborious, and that's probably what they do today, because that is one product that is hard to stick in a jar automatically. And on the left actually is Backcountry Bar. This is some of the equipment. I kind of threw this in the slide deck just so people would have it. It's not all inclusive. We have other things as well, but this gives you a quick rundown of what the kitchen has. I did replace a 75-gallon kettle with a brand new 75-gallon kettle. But we also have a boiler that operates steam jacketed equipment. Now, the pilot plant, as I'd mentioned earlier, that's for the most part, the Simplots, McCain's of the world. We are actually one of 2 labs in the country that simulate commercial processing on the small scale to support the registration. I don't know if support's the right word, but for companies seeking the registration of pesticides and fungicides on a raw commodity. So in some cases, they will require analysis of the end product that is a consumable, whether it be a consumable for humans or animals, because we do not want those pesticides or fungicides making their way into our food products. We don't do the analysis here. We simply generate the fractions as required in the protocols received and freeze them and ship them off to an analytical lab, and our part is kind of done. And as you can see in this slide, again, mainly commercial, small commercial, I'd say, just some of the commodities that we actually process in that facility. Oddly enough, we're like the only people out there that process citrus in this particular manner. So we will get a couple thousand pounds of oranges priority overnighted from Florida. I don't see that bill, and I don't want to see that bill. Now we're bleeding into probably what you really want to know about. If you have any questions, feel free to pipe up. It's not a big audience, and I have no problem answering, or at least trying to answer whatever's burning your brain. But packaging can get really complex, as I'm sure you're aware. You can look at Mylar bags, simple containers. Some are actually vented, so a vegetable can transpire and it doesn't puff the package up. We're not going to go deep into that rabbit hole. The basic thing is it provides product protection, right? And hopefully some tamper proofing, so somebody can't inadvertently or intentionally contaminate your product. It's also an incredibly important place to advertise and market your product, right? Your package draws people's attention, and it's got all the information about that product on it. Now, what about food package design? Well, number one, is it food contact safe? I mean, that's pretty important. You don't want things leaching out of the packaging into your food product. Typically, if you work with a packaging company, they understand whether or not their product meets FDA requirements, because they don't want to be held liable for your product either. Does it have a contamination barrier? Does it prevent contamination from occurring? Same thing with this all goes hand in hand, really. Does it prevent microbial chemical spoilage? Because if it's doesn't have a suitable barrier, it might lead to contaminating that product. Some cases you might want to prevent odor transmission. So that's an important aspect. Again, it depends on the product that you want to produce. Does it provide physical protection? Surprisingly, I used to be in private industry many moons ago, and well, it's pretty easy to take a forklift and stick it through a cardboard bag, right? Or even a fabric lined bag. That doesn't provide adequate protection in that particular case, but you want some protection from being jostled around or packaged. Does it provide a tamper indication? Does it have a seal on it? Let's say if it's a container of hummus, it's probably a wise idea to have a shrink wrap on the top of it. So if that's removed, somebody knows that the product might be contaminated or has been tampered with. Now, is the package lightweight? Does that matter? Yeah, kind of, because you've got to ship the package you purchased or the packaging that you purchased to your facility or wherever you're producing the product. Glass is inherently heavyweight, so it typically costs more to ship. Are you going to end up selling your product online? Shipping weight is a factor, so keep that in mind. And this is just kind of a cool product I saw, because I think on the next slide, we talk about, should you see the product or should you not see the product? This is actually a white box with a cellophane insert, and the macaroni looks like the lady's hair. Is the product visible? If so, is that a good thing? Again, see previous slide or see this one with a frog somehow stuffed in a jar of pickles. And I'm sure that some of you that can know that some things that are canned just don't really look that attractive, at least to me. I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but if you can tomatoes, typically there is some separation there. Someone's offended by the frog in the jar. No, I'm just kidding. But is the shape of the package distracting? Sometimes you see packages come in all shapes and sizes, right? They should generally be aesthetically pleasing. You should have a place. It should be able to have space to apply a label, right? Is the package easy or hard to use? Is it, if it's got perforations or however? I'm sure you've all dealt with jars or packages that are a little confusing or difficult to open. And another one, sometimes people don't really think about, how does it stack on a shelf, or how does it pack? I mean, the more, let's say if you're shipping in bulk, can you get multiple pieces in one box and save on shipping? People can also get a little, go a little overboard with their packaging. They think it looks really cool. They've got a lot of different colors, and it's just become cost prohibitive, right? So you've got to be cognizant of your package design. Simple and clean, I think, is typically better, but you are the end decider on that front. And is the packaging material recyclable? Plastics are a big issue in today's world. So that's something to consider, because there are conscientious consumers out there that see too much packaging and may decide to not buy your product as a result. Now we're going to get a little bit into food labeling. We're keeping this elevation pretty high. I don't want to bore you to death, because I know this stuff, you can get into the nitty gritty of it. I have no idea what that bag of chips says, but I think it's pretty cool, and I'd assume the product is hot. But we're just going to go through some general labeling requirements, the name of the food, statement of identity, content statements, ingredient list, and the nutrition facts label. So there is an FDA food labeling guide, should you choose to look that up. That link just goes to the default FDA food site. But you've got a couple different components of your label, right? You've got a principal display panel, which will show you, an information panel, a nutritional label, and there is label criteria, right? There are regulations surrounding labels. If they were all different shapes and sizes, it would be a real pain for people to read and understand. And you need to tell them where the product is coming from. I don't know where that can of Campbell's soup is from, but I thought that was cool because I haven't seen it before. But you've got the principal display panel, right? It's basically just the front label, and it must appear on the front of the container. And it's got a statement of identity. It's tomato soup, right? And you've got a net quantity statement, which is also required. And you've got to use the common name, you can't use a nickname, and it's got to be prominently sized, so it's clear cut and easy to identify. And you also need to list the modifications. Did you slice it? Is it crab with a K? And that's the regulation that covers this. Now, the information panel is typically right to the PDP or the principal display panel, and the information panel labeling names. You've got the name and address or the contact information, your ingredient list, and the nutritional label. Now, funny enough, and we'll get to this later on, the nutrition label is not necessarily required depending on the quantity of product that you're producing. So here's an example. You've all, I'm sure, seen these before, the ingredient lists. And depending on the products, some of the names you can't really pronounce. But they are always listed in descending order by weight, and they always have the common names, right? Now, they also need to comply with ingredient listing rules. Many spices can be grouped as spices. You've got to list salt because it seems like we are becoming a low sodium society, but processed foods definitely are not in many cases. For those of you on a low sodium diet, you might know what I'm talking about. But you must list the spices that are eaten as actual foods, so onion, garlic, pepper, so on. Now, food allergen labeling is a pretty big deal. I don't know how much food safety things you've covered, but if you've ever looked on the FDA's list of recalls, it seems like the recalls, the number one reason for recalls are mislabeled allergens, or a product that might contain an allergen that is not labeled. When I got my start in the food industry many years ago, this was nowhere near the issue it is today, partly I think because people just didn't care as much. It's a pretty big deal. And the FDA is actually adding to this, the big eight, as we'll call them, another one, and I forget when the regulation goes into effect, but sesame will be added to this list in the next few years. Here's your food allergen labeling format. As you can see at the bottom, contains wheat ingredients, plain, easy to read. It's always in the same spot. Now, here are the components of a nutrition label, right? You've got all this required information. Again, this is primarily on the slide for your reference. They, again, aren't required. I think we'll get to that in the next slide. Yeah, so small businesses are exempted. I think it's something like 10,000, don't quote me on the volume, 10,000 units or less, not necessary. But, with people want to know what's in their food. So I think it's advisable personally that you do put a nutrition facts panel on your product. It just gives people a way to find more information about your product, even if you are exempted. And this exemption isn't completely accurate because you see food served in restaurants, and large chain restaurants are now required to provide that information, but they're selling a lot of product to a lot of different people. Now, how do you figure out what's in your product? You can do it analytically, which, the clients that come to us, we typically don't recommend that, even though this says recommended, mainly because I haven't looked up the costing in a while, but I'd say it's probably around $1,000 to $1,200 if I were to guess to get that done. Now, it is obviously more accurate. We have computer software at this facility that allows us to take your formula, input that formula into the software, and it will spit out a nutrition facts panel for us or for you. And we do that for, a reasonable fee. Now, label claims, right? You can't say this is going to cure cancer. That's a no-no. But you are allowed to make claims if they're approved by the FDA, and you can get on their website and look those claims up. But nutrient claims, of course, right? Fat-free, low in sodium, you've seen those. Health claims, lowers cholesterol, healthy, etc. Now, you cannot just make up a claim. I mean, I've seen people do it. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to get a warning letter from the FDA if you do something like that. I don't know if any of you remember, what was it? Yogurt Activia, right? The promotes good gut health. Well, if they were sued, I think to the tune of $300 million over their label claims that it had so much bacteria in it, and was good for gut health. I'm sure that marketing, though, and the amount of product they sold outweighed the lawsuit that was filed and won against them. Now, UPC codes, these are pretty important, right? I'm sure you've all seen them. They're not actually required as a matter of food regulation, but pretty much every store requires them, right? I mean, they're pretty much a necessary item if you're going to go into a store, because every food product has them. Now, if you're just selling at a farmer's market, probably not, but you can buy these things. It's not really that big of a deal. And I would recommend it if you plan on expanding your company, if you plan on going into the retail environment. You're going to have to. The stores will say, hey, we need this. Now, organic certification. Now, this is kind of a marketing tool, right? It depends on your audience. I would imagine most of you are familiar with organic products. You've seen them in particular at farmers markets or on store shelves or at the co-op. Now, they do require certification of all organic foods, and this outlines the organic processes, but so 100% organic must contain at least 95% certified organic material. If it just says made with, and you may have seen that on a label, it's 70 to 95%, and less than 70% can list specific organic ingredients on the label if you choose to do so. In this particular state, the Idaho State Department of Ag is the one providing the inspection, and it typically requires an annual inspection fee, and it's based on the product revenue, so how much product you're producing. But if you see that label, that means it's been inspected. Now, there are other certifications which, again, are a marketing tool to a degree, and some are required if you're going into a particular store. Let's say Whole Foods might require, and you want to say you're non-GMO. They're not going to say, well, they're not going to let you just print that on the label. While you could, they want to see an actual certification. So they want to see a third-party body certifying the product. They don't just want to rely on you and what you say it is. Same thing with gluten-free, and the O in the circle, or the O and the U, is the Orthodox Union. So kosher certifying body. There are actually, I think, around 300 kosher certifying bodies out there now. And there are new symbols coming on board all the time with inspection services, right? I have never personally dealt with Fair Trade or the Sustainable Food Trade Association or the Rainforest Alliance. Just happen to come across those. I do have experience with kosher, non-GMO, gluten-free, and halal. But those things, you know, for folks that are using our facility and they're just getting started out, we typically don't recommend that they go that route unless they have a really good reason for doing so, because these do cost money. I did help one entity get gluten-free certified, and I think the initial cost was around $2,000 or so to just get that going, and they had to inspect all the raw materials and that sort of thing. But they thought it was worth it for their product to have that. Now let's talk about marketing basics. Look, I'm a food scientist first, so that's my disclaimer right there. You know, we all kind of know this stuff. I've heard it over the years and dealt with a lot of clients and talked about marketing their product, and some of this stuff just makes good common sense. But, you know, when you're starting to develop your business, and I know SCORE spoke with a bunch of folks at the start of this seminar on having a business plan, right? well, how do you position your brand? What is your story? A good story is a good selling point. And who is your target audience? Who do you want to sell this stuff to? Are you going to focus on higher end markets? I mean, are you going to stick with a farmer's market? Are you going to go into something like, at least in the Treasure Valley area, we have the Boise Co-op. I would consider Boise Co-op a higher end market. So, what are you after? So target audience and target market kind of bleed into the same. And product packaging, we talked about its importance, but the product package really helps you sell your products. People do judge a product based on the packaging. And what is your logo? What's your logo going to look like? I mean, I would like to say I've got an eye for design. I probably don't. But there are a lot of really talented graphic designers out there that could probably have a chat with you and help you refine a logo that you really like, that is probably going to be better than what you can produce. Not to say that you all aren't fantastic graphic designers, but lean on other people's expertise. Now, what about consumer preferences? And it's like, well, how do you figure out consumer preferences? There's a picture of the farmers market on the previous slide. Our facility has a relationship with the Capital City Farmers Market, or the Capital City Market. And we haven't done this in a while, obviously, pandemic stuff, but we could get them in a booth for a day and just get, let's say you do a small pilot run at this facility, 5 gallons of whatever, 10 gallons, and you take it to the farmer's market and you just do free tastings and have a conversation with people, right? Just talk to them about your product, figure out what they like, what they don't like, and you could come back and refine your formulation based on customer input. What do they think the packaging looks like? And what do you stand for? Do you have a message that you want to convey? Something that you care about, and as part of the reason you're producing this particular food product. Now, the only way to build brand awareness is to get your product out there, right? Go out there, tell your story, just like I mentioned with the market booth. Markets are a fantastic way to get your product seen, be out and interact with people. And we'll get to other avenues of getting that message out as well. I mean, because you also want to build perceived value. One thing that smaller businesses often really don't have is the economy of scale, right? So your product is typically going to be more expensive to make than some giant food company. And let's take salsa for an example. And you've got a lot of salsas on the market. Pace is a large brand name. I'm guessing many of you heard of. It's pretty much going to be impossible to compete with the Paces of the world. So how do you differentiate yourself from them? Is it you tout the quality of your product, fresh local ingredients? It's more than just price. People will see that it's produced locally, that you're a cool person, whatever, you're at the farmer's market, and they're like, yeah, I want to, not only do I like this product, but it's a great company and I want to support that company. So it isn't really always about price, and keep that in mind. Now, you also want to identify distribution channels, right? Where are you going to sell the product? We kind of mentioned that earlier in the previous slide, but maybe it's online. Online is becoming a really robust method of buying food products now. And it's kind of surprising. Some things are easy to ship, as I mentioned before, and some aren't. If you've got something that is easy to ship, maybe that is a route you want to go. Do you plan on going on grocery store shelves? Or let's say, when I say specialty market, what we're talking about is like, maybe you just want to sell it in gift shops at national parks, right? Something very niche, unique, smaller batch. Or maybe you just want to stay at a farmer's market. Now, please don't shoot me for people that are big proponents of farmers markets. I think they're fantastic as well. But to me, if a company wants to expand, they want to use the farmers market as a marketing tool. They get in front of their customers, and then when they expand into stores, they bow out of the farmers market, because if they continue to sell in the farmers market while they have it in a retail establishment, what can happen is they end up competing with the establishments that are now their clients or customers. So, great marketing tool if you plan on eventually going into the grocery. I really wouldn't do both. That's me. You got to make that decision for yourself. Another thing that I think is a really cool idea is cause-based marketing, right? Support something you believe in, give back to the community. So, and it doesn't have to be a ton of money, right? Let's say you're like, I really believe my kid's going to high school. I really like this high school. I want to give back. Put on your website that, for every jar sold, you're giving 10 cents back to the high school, something of that nature, right? Or to a cause or a foundation that you believe in. It's a feel-good measure. It's a marketing tool. It's a win-win. Stores typically like to see that because, local, even though it's been around for a while, stores really like to see, even national chain stores, they like to see that they and the products they are putting on their shelves are working towards the greater good, if you will. Now, this marketing tool or this marketing section wouldn't be complete, obviously, without social media. I am horrible at it. I personally hate Facebook. It drives me bananas. I look at comments, my blood pressure goes up, and I have to get off of it. But they can be invaluable marketing tools, right? And they're essentially free. I mean, you can pay for marketing, of course, and target audience marketing. But when you're starting out, it's an excellent way to communicate about your company. And if you're in a store and you're running a promotion, if people are following you on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, you could say, hey, I'm going to be at this store, or we're running a promotion, because you run promotions from time to time, provide a discount on your product, or let's say a really valuable tool when this hopefully starts taking place again, aside from Costco, is having in-person tastings in the store. That really does successfully drive sales from what I have seen with the clients we currently have. It's a great way to get in front of people. People walk in the store, they taste your product, and there's a decent chance if they like it, they're going to buy it right there and might become a repeat customer. But those that follow you might, on these social media platforms, can stay up to date with what you've got going on, or maybe you've decided to release a new product, a new flavor, whatever it might be. And here are just two examples of companies. One is a Facebook page. Oma and Poppies is actually a client of the Food Technology Center right now. They were in here earlier in the week producing product, but this is their Facebook page. Zaka Hummus is a past client. They have now gone to a co-packer. So they are having their product co-packed. The beans are sourced in the Palouse from the family farm, but they have a social media presence. And I just wanted to give you an example of that, not like you haven't seen it before, but I think while it takes some effort to do this, I think it is worthwhile. It's certainly no harm, no foul. Now, distribution, small scale. Now, this is a tough one because 99% of our clients are on the left, right? They're manufacturing the product and they are putting it in the back of a pickup and they are distributing it to the stores that they're in. So we also have dry storage space. So in some cases that might be staged at our facility for some time, or if they make a lot of product, they can come and pick up pallets on an as needed basis. Now you do have a few distributors that will cater to smaller manufacturers. And one, at least in this valley, is Charlie's Produce. It's a refrigerated truck, at least in this picture. And we have a client in here today, Humana Hummus, that uses Charlie's Produce to distribute their product. And we also have Grasmick in town that occasionally ships product for clients. The problem with distribution on a small scale is there are a limited number of companies that do it. You go from small to gigantic. So when I say gigantic, you've got Cisco, US Foods, KeHE, DPI, and the list goes on. And I was actually talking to Ariel a little earlier about this. It's kind of a weird chicken and egg thing for small producers, because even if you're producing a decent quantity of product, you don't go to Cisco or US Foods or whatever the case may be and say, I want you to buy my product and distribute it. They're going to ignore you, basically. So what happens is, and this is just a general example, is that let's say one of your customers is Albertsons, and Albertsons likes your product, and the buyer comes to you, and you're expanding your presence in their stores, right? You've gone from 3 stores to 10 to now you're at 20, and randomly choose 20. But then the buyer might reach out to one of their primary distributors and say, hey, we've got this product, we want to expand its presence in our stores or increase its availability throughout the northwestern section of our stores, and we want you to start carrying it. Well, Albertsons, they're going to carry it for Albertsons, right? So suddenly now you find yourself in the larger distribution chain. There might be different avenues than that I'm unfamiliar with. That seems to be the main avenue in my particular experience. So that's pretty much all I have. I hope I didn't bore you to death. I hope you got some decent information out of me. I'm happy to field any questions that you might have, good, bad, or otherwise. So have at it.
Do you have any advice for like incubator or kitchen incubators or commissary kitchens? That's a big need in our community.
That's a good question, Jennifer. Depends on the level of community support in some cases, or I would say, is it going to be subsidized by taxes? Will it have enough of a client base to pay for itself? Because that can be challenging. I mean, this facility is we're very lucky we have the pilot plant to subsidize the rates in our particular kitchen, even though you said you're in Teton County, is that correct?
Yes.
So, here, without our research component or pilot plant service component, however you want to phrase it, it would be pretty much impossible to keep our doors open. Commercial scale, even small scale equipment is pretty darn expensive. So, I think I mentioned earlier the 75-gallon kettle I purchased. Now I had it made because you kind of do. People just don't have those on the shelves, and that was $42,000. I mean, you can be creative and find some used stuff. I always recommend people inspect it. Depends on, and our kitchen, I think you've been through here, have you not?
Yes.
Yes. So I want to be optimistic and upbeat that I think there should be more of these, and not that I don't think there should be more. You have to be creative in how they're run.
Yeah, I find that every location and community is so different. So it's been tricky because there's not like a here's a one size fits all approach, and this is how you can emulate it in your community. Because if that was the case, we'd have them in Idaho. And in our community, just the lack of the economy of the scale, even in a kitchen, a shared use facility, was the downfall, and it's the high rent that they had to pay.
Right. So I do know many years ago there was one in Bonneville County, and don't quote me on this. I've never visited that facility. I heard it was in severe disrepair. It wasn't actively managed. It was on the honor system. And I hate to say this, when you rent things, people break things. So you need to actively manage it, or they just don't know how to properly use the equipment. So if you let people run amok, the place is going to go to muck. And there are, there's definitely opportunity, and they're different. There, like you said correctly, I mean, there isn't a one size fits all model, right? As I mentioned earlier, we're a small food manufacturing facility. In reality, when you say kitchen, people think of more of a restaurant kitchen, right? I mean, they've got decent sized equipment. We're a tier above that, generally speaking. Yes, we have some restaurant sized equipment, but I'd have a hard time going in there and finding a knife. That's not what we use.
Josh, I have a question. From how far away have folks come to use the Food Tech Center?
Seattle. We did have a regular client when I first started working here. I started here in 2008. We had one from Declo, which is, outside of Twin, coming here regularly. But now primarily it is within the valley. Occasionally people will come from further away for a test run. I mean, I don't have an exhaustive list of kitchens. I know there are a handful in the state of Washington, and I am aware that there are some kitchens that, because restaurants aren't working 24/7. So if you've got a really good relationship with a local restaurant, you might be able to rent time in their space after they're closed and manufacture your product if the equipment there is suitable for it.
That's the model we're using now in the Tetons. We have a list of restaurants, certified kitchens that are available for rent. And it's very tough for a new food entrepreneur to go in and even afford the rates that they're asking. And then, like you said, when people borrow equipment and do things break. It's just a very tricky situation. And Extension in this nationally has been trying to help with shared use kitchens. And there's a gal I know that's isn't she in Arkansas maybe, and she's been working with different county governments and converting fairgrounds kitchens into these shared use spaces. But she had a huge USDA grant. The problem that I've seen when I've researched this is that once the grant funds are gone, there's not the economic sustainability to keep these facilities afloat, and it just seems everything's like subsidized. I have yet to really find a model where that nonprofit government, I sound really Debbie Downer right now, but I have yet to really see something that succeeds, that's not a for-profit business, that has someone who's in there managing it actively, and that there has another side business to help keep it afloat, like at the U of I Food Technology Center. There's the educational component. Like that's the other branch of it. So
yeah, it's definitely challenging, Jennifer. I mean, like I said, we're very lucky here. Now the data is long in the tooth. I think it was from 2006. There was an article out that this facility was one of three sustainable facilities in the country that were operating in this manner. And then by the time it was published, one of them failed. Later data had as many as 180 commercial kitchens available for use throughout the country. I don't know what I don't know what that number is at this juncture in time. And some are big, some are small. Probably a lot are small. You know, I would call us kind of medium sized because we have forklift service, we have dry storage, we have freezer storage. Now I've been to Rutgers Food Innovation Center in New Jersey. They actually have 2 sites. Now they're equidistant from 2 large major metropolitan areas, one being New York City, 2 being Philadelphia. So they've got a large client pool, but that facility is giant. I mean, they have pallet freezer storage, pallet cooler storage. And when I was there, they were still empty. So they charge a lot more for their time than we do. And I mean, to give you an example, they also helped in the development of the Impossible Burger. So there's a lot of talent there and a lot going on, but they really keep themselves afloat more than anything with education and outreach, a lot of education, food safety training, that sort of thing. And I could see where if people, you know, this is just talking out of the box, but, you know, if you had a good relationship with, or some sort of relationship with a nonprofit that was providing, you know, food insecure people with food, where part of it was processing food, the county was willing to subsidize it. You know, it could be a real win for the community where you're helping entrepreneurs get their start with their food product idea. You're helping food insecure people, and you know, that to me sounds like a great opportunity, but you got to sell it, then you got to manage it.
So speaking of case studies, and maybe to end on a positive note or just a hopeful note, I know that it can be really fly. So I was wondering if you could tell us, without naming names or giving away any personal information, maybe a product that's come through your facility that had some major flaws and did not take off, and maybe what those flaws were, and then maybe end with a product that actually really took off and brought that producer the level of success that they were seeking, and maybe what were the key aspects that contributed to that success?
Okay. You froze up for a moment there, but I can read between the sentences.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's not your fault. It's this dang technology. But that's a good question, Ariel. So one thing I was really sad to see these guys go. It was Voce tea. It was a dehydrated fruit tea. Really good product, right? I was impressed with it because in a way it wasn't very complex, right? You just mix some different dried fruits in a tea bag and then you throw it in some hot water while the end consumer does. And the perfect product to put in a small box and ship, right? Great for online shipping because it's cheap to ship. But the dried fruit was really expensive, so his margins weren't very good. And this guy he's a professor over at the College of Idaho, actually. Great guy. And he bought a tea bag machine from China, but it never quite worked for his product, right? Typical tea that you see is ground up spices. So you can't put a full slice of orange automatically in a tea bag. So they're sitting there doing a lot of this manually, which is not sustainable. I mean, not to build scale. And he did some market research, and he's a little impatient, but he decided based on the rate at which he was expanding, even though its customer base was good and really liked his product, he just decided to bow out. I mean, that's the cool thing about this facility. Aside from him buying a tea bagging machine, there's minimal investment incurred to a large degree. And I mean, I'd say success is relative and it's got to be defined by the company, right? If you want to produce your product and just sell it at the farmer's market and you're content with that, or content with maybe using that as an avenue to get your teenager out of the house and sell product and interact with people, that's fantastic. I call that a success, right? I mean, and we've got bigger success stories than that. I mean, in terms of, I guess, economically, but I mentioned Zaka Hummus. She went to a co-packer, and I think they're doing really well. One of the keys to her success is she's pretty business oriented. You know, I'm scientifically minded more than I am business minded. She's a CPA by training and is always looking at those numbers, right? Your profits and losses, and really paying attention to the bottom line and the marketing piece, right? And really, I think this kind of stuff takes a hive mind. It's not just me sitting over here in my little cell. You know, it's go out there and gather all the information you can. Most people are really willing and happy to have these conversations with you. And if I, you know, like I tell people all the time, if I don't know the answer, I probably know someone who does. And I'm happy to send them that way. You know, like if your local community has one of those little think tank places, help me out here, Ariel. There's one in Boise, and I've spoken there and I'm just losing it.
Like Trailhead or like,
yes, like Trailhead.
Yeah.
And Trailhead even has, you know, a food competition that they administer during Boise Startup Week and that sort of thing, which we've had people enter that. No one from here has won, but that's a cool idea, right? And also spurs enthusiasm about the local food movement, if you will. But Zaka was a great success story. And another one, I shouldn't end it on this, but it's already coming out of my mouth. So this was back in 2012. It was a company called Fit Wraps. Fit Wraps was run by this great guy, Shige. And Shige was very enthusiastic, made this cool product, Fit Wraps, actually got Boise Entrepreneur of the Year, got angel funding. You know, he wanted to push this thing to a really high level, got a lot of money in angel funding. And I think they went out of business in 2017. I consider it a resounding success for this facility, right? Because they graduated, they left. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in the end for them, but it was quite the learning experience. So, I mean, there are a lot of success stories out there, and you can see them even if you walk down the Boise Farmers Market or and they're out there for sure. I don't want to drive people away from their passion, but I'm happy to help. So people can, reach out to me at any time via email. You can find me on the web.
And I know you guys were doing those multi-day classes in the past. You guys are doing that online now? So what are the resources right now for people living remotely throughout the state?
We have tapped into tech help. So the University of Idaho has 2 food safety specialists. That one is housed in Twin Falls. The other is in Boise. Both are out of tech help. And that's a really good question, Jennifer, because I have a hard time finding the right site, but it's on Tech Help's website, and you can register for that course and take it at your own leisure. And if anybody wants to take it and has trouble finding it, just let me know and I'll make sure I get you the right address. They have additional courses as well. And if you're really serious about pursuing, that's a great start, but they also teach, not to go down the food safety rabbit hole, but preventive controls for human food.
Yeah. So we can compile a resource list for you guys. And so I don't have those webinars up here on this slide, but our Cultivating Success website does have a number of recorded webinars, especially related to marketing and more of the food production side, but we do have a few things that might be related. And we'll send up a follow-up email that has the link to Josh's course that's online through the Tech Help and other resources that they're providing. And then also another entrepreneurial class that's online as a self-paced program that has been developed by one of our other faculty members up on campus. So we want to make sure all that's available to you. And Josh, I really appreciate your comments because I think that we need to temper the enthusiasm with reality. You know, we want people to dream big, but we don't want them to lose their savings without really thinking it through first. And so I always appreciate the dose of reality mixed with humor that you provide to us. And I also know that you have a lot to offer people. And so I do encourage you to reach out to Josh if you really want maybe another opinion on the feasibility of your product, or you're just running into a real, you know, hang up on how do I package this, or, you know, what's the best kind of label for this or something like that. Wealth of information.
And I'm happy to help in any way I can. So, because that's what we're here for.
Well, we really appreciate it. Jen, if there's nothing else that you have to add, I'll let you talk about that in a second, but we do have our last of the post-webinar surveys, and you can access that either by typing in this link that you see here on the screen. I shortened it so you don't have to type in 800 letters and numbers, or you can just hold your phone up to the screen and it will take you directly to the survey through this QR code, and it's pretty mobile friendly. It's not a very long survey. We'd love to get your feedback on future programming and also how this particular webinar was for you. And Jennifer put the long link in the chat, yes, so you can just do it right from the chat too. Thank you. Anything else, Jen?
So much. That's all we have. Appreciate you guys taking time to chat today, and we've learned a lot. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. And Ariel, if you do have any sort of handouts or some of the resource lists that we were talking about, like the web addresses, can you send that to me, and then we'll make sure to get that out to all the participants.
Will do.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.